Welcome back to the Morning Docket. I'm Stacey Delicat in for Jesse Weber today. Top of the hour, January 4th, only 4 days into the new year. And as you can imagine, already a lot going on. We're going to bring you the top crimes in a moment. And when we come back from that, we are doing our Law and Crime Rewind, taking you back to Ohio versus Anthony Kirkland. You may remember Anthony Kirkland, the convicted serial killer who was sentenced to death. He had that sentence thrown out because of some comments the prosecutors made. Then we saw a sentencing retrial. We'll be walking you through that and how things played out in that retrial. And we'll see, was he sentenced to death once again? Stay tuned for that. But first, here's Anthony Velez with today's top crime stories.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. An inmate in Florida and several corrections officers are in hot water after an investigation revealed the inmate received special treatments from guards in exchange for tax advice. The investigation conducted by the Orange County Corrections Department found that 61-year-old inmate Robert Patchen was given special privileges, such as being allowed to eat Chinese takeout, access to the internet, and sitting in the guard tower in exchange for tax advice, help with student loans, and help with mortgages. The alleged corruption came to light after two other inmates wrote letters to the Sentinel complaining about the special treatment. All of the officers implicated in the scheme have resigned or retired from their posts, and it's unclear if Patchen will face charges. A man in Florida is under arrest after he allegedly shot his wife and her parents in front of his young children. 34-year-old William Brian Stillwell reportedly showed up uninvited to the home of his in-laws, Robert and Naima Snellgrove, with a 9mm pistol and shot them both, as well as his wife, Mona Stillwell, in front of his twin 5-year-old children. Stillwell reportedly told authorities Mona cheated on him with his best friend. All three victims suffered non-life-threatening injuries, and Stillwell now faces several felonies, including 3 counts of attempted murder.
You want her in the passenger seat? That's our officer in the passenger seat. Back here. Okay, back here. Good. Put the gun down here. Hey, come over here. Come over.
Authorities in Arkansas released daring dashcam footage of an officer risking her life to save a 1-year-old child during a tense, armed standoff with her father. The suspect, 43-year-old Ferris Deloney, reportedly fired a shot at a Walmart parking lot in Little Rock before taking off with his infant child, leading officers on a chase. When Deloney finally pulled over, he reportedly took the child hostage at gunpoint. That's when Officer Brittany Godfrey successfully pleaded for the father to release the child.
Sir, can I please just get the baby out the car? Can I get the baby?
Deloney now faces charges of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and endangering the welfare of a minor. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
All right, thanks for that, Anthony. Well, as I mentioned, the Law and Crime Rewind is back, and today we are talking about Anthony Kirkland's resentencing trial. Now, let's go through some of the facts here. Anthony Kirkland, a convicted serial killer, convicted with killing 4 different women over the course of several years. I believe the first murder he was accused of happened when he was just 18 years old. Well, he was tried separately for these murders, and in his last trial, he was convicted of murdering 2 young girls. Well, here's the thing. During the sentencing phase of that trial, prosecutors said he should get the death penalty because he used the words, he shouldn't be getting a freebie. You know, the fact that he was already sentenced to life for these 2 other women's death. Now, he's convicted again of killing 2 other women. He shouldn't be, these girls shouldn't be freebies, is what the prosecutor said. Well, Kirkland's lawyers stepped in. They filed an appeal after that, claiming that what the prosecutor said was just not appropriate, and the Ohio Supreme Court ruled that the prosecutor went too far in his remarks. So they kept Kirkland's conviction, but they tossed out the sentence. That's where we're going to pick up this resentencing trial getting underway just late last year. Let's take a look and see where it all starts.
Even though she went out sometimes, what time was it by now? Was it midnight or later?
No, this was about 11 or so.
About 11 o'clock at night. This was dark.
Yes.
Okay. Did you have some idea where she might have gone?
Well, yes, I'm figuring she's gone to her mom's because she had to go that way, and normally when she left out the house on them kind of terms, she would go to her mom's.
All right. Now, did you see Cassania's backpack? Did you see her ring? Did you see her phone, the things you said she always carries with her? Was that still in the house when she disappeared?
No, those were with her.
All right. Did you try to call her on her cell phone?
Yes.
And what happened when you did?
Well, you know, they turn them off when they don't want to talk or look at them and don't answer.
Okay, so you called that number, but you didn't get any answer?
Yes.
Okay. Did you try to call Cassania's mother?
Yes.
And was Cassania there?
She didn't answer either.
Okay. I take it you called more than once?
Yes.
Okay. Eventually, did you reach Cassania's mother?
No.
Never got her at all?
No.
Okay. All right, what about the next morning? I take it she didn't return home that night? Cassania did not return home that night?
No, she did not.
Okay. The next morning, did you resume trying to locate her, and how did you go about that? What did you do?
I'm still calling. I get the mom, and mom tells me she hasn't seen her.
So she hadn't been to her mother's house?
No.
Did you know of any of Cassania's friends that you could call?
No.
Okay. What about the next day was a school day, is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did you call the school to try to see if she had made it to school that next morning?
Yes.
And what did they tell you?
School told me she wasn't there.
She was absent from school that day.
Mm-hmm.
You still hadn't seen her, still hadn't heard from her?
No.
Okay. At some point, Ms. Crawford, did you call the police?
Yes.
Did you report her missing?
Yes.
Okay. They didn't have any information to give you at that point?
No.
Okay. And I think several days, maybe 5-6 days go by. Did some police officers contact you?
Seemed like it was sooner.
Seemed sooner to you? Okay. Mm-hmm. Did they make a request from you? Anything they wanted to get?
They wanted to get her dental records.
Okay. Did these police officers tell you why they needed Cassania's dental records?
No, they told me they would like to get the dental records. Seemed like to compare.
Okay. Did they tell you they had found a deceased person?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you agree to that? Did you agree to let the police officers get Cassania's dental records?
Yes.
Okay. And at some point, not too long after that, did the police officers come back and talk to you about this body that they had found?
Yes.
What did they tell you?
They told me that found a body in the woods. It was from, what's that, Blair Bridge?
Yes, ma'am.
A city worker had found this body in the woods.
Okay.
And
did they tell you they believed that was Cassania?
Yes.
Okay. Did they tell you they had actually done had the dental examinations done and it was Cassania?
Not at that time.
Okay.
I think when they got the dental, they came back and told me that it was.
Well, that was the grandmother of Cassania Crawford. Let me walk you back through a few more facts in this case. Again, Kirkland received the death penalty in 2010 after he was convicted for murdering Esme Kenny and Cassania Crawford, two teenagers that he targeted and killed. We just heard Cassania Crawford's grandmother talking about how they had to use dental records to identify her, how a city worker came upon the bodies. Now, earlier, Kirkland had been sentenced to death for killing 45-year-old Mary Jo Newton and 27-year-old Kimmy Rawlinson. He pleaded guilty to those murders and, as I said, was sentenced to life. It was in the murder cases regarding Esme Kenny and Cassania Crawford that he was sentenced to death. But this retrial, we are rewinding to, so to speak, is one in which jurors will get another chance to decide whether or not he should get the death penalty because of comments made by the prosecutor in the sentencing the first time around. Well, you know, I want to move on right now to Anthony Kirkland's police interview himself, because in the first trial, jurors got to hear him in his own words, and then again we hear this again. Let's go ahead and listen.
So, did she hang up because she just met you, or you already in the middle of your conversation?
And she, I still had to say she saw me smoking the weed.
Right.
Smoking the weed and she hung up.
So she was talking on the cell phone when she met you. Okay. But when it wasn't in the middle of your conversation, it was when she originally met you. You say she was talking on the cell phone.
Yeah.
And she hung up and then said, hey, what's up, what's up, what's up? What you?
Then I asked her if she was old enough to be. I said she's old enough to be. So I asked her something.
So you asked her, so you kind of figured she was a little young.
Yeah, and then that's like also if you see, like, you might see a woman smoking a cigarette.
Right.
And then you might ask, well, are you old enough to be doing it? It's more or less could be like a compliment.
A compliment that she
it was kind of, even though it was lighting over there, it's not real bright lighting.
Well, and this is just something that I've noticed. You have a propensity to like younger women. Like Mia was young. Whether that happened or she was 19. Right, that's what I'm saying. So maybe you were confused about her age or something. Did you ever have... Anthony, was the problem with you... I'm trying to figure out what would trigger you off. Is the problem that the people that you would end up with, the ones that really fought it off, is that what triggered your anger in it?
Usually when I met or...
Like Maya was pretty, she was out there, she was wanting money for what she did, maybe. From what I understand, that's what I got out of her.
But then usually when I met Maya, it was already some bullshit. It was already some bullshit involved. And I was probably already angry.
What I just wonder, it just seems like so you burned it to cleanse. Did you ever go back and visit Cassandra that week she was missing? Did you ever do anything to the scene to conceal it, or did you just stay away?
I went back.
You went back? When did you go back?
After it was announced. Okay.
What did you do when you go back?
I went back and looked at this. Remember.
Did you initially burn Cassandra up here and then use something to move her down? Describe that. What did you do? Wow. So we got the impression that Cassandra was originally burned up here by the sidewalk. Is that true? That's a yes? Okay. What made you push her down to the place where you found her, where she was covered in tires? Did you do all that night? Or did you come back a day or two later? I mean, if you did, I'm just trying to get a clarification. What did you use to push her down the thing? Did you push her with your hands? Because you burned, obviously. Did you use a stick, something? I don't know. Did you use something while she's burning? She was hot burning. Did you burn herself? She was too hot to use. You sure you didn't use that 4x4 we found? Because we found a big pole with burn on the end.
That might have been when she was in the stir.
Stirred initially or stirred when you put her down toward the end?
Stirred initially.
Well, certainly some damning testimony from the convicted killer himself, Anthony Kirkland, but that's just it. We know he's already been convicted of these murders. In that last police interrogation clip that we heard, and we saw the transcript accompanying it, he was talking about Cassandra Crawford, the teenage girl. She had snuck out of her house, was wearing SpongeBob SquarePants pajama pants. She was on the cell phone when he found her and then brutally murdered her and burned her body. Judge Ashley Willcott still with me this hour. Ashley, I mean, clearly, he's already been convicted of these crimes, but you can hear his voice in these interrogations, and he appears to be totally, emotionless. very straightforward with his answers. I mean, what can we sort of glean from that? And in this sentencing phase, this resentencing phase, do his answers to the questions, does his demeanor during that interview really matter to jurors?
Oh, absolutely, I think it does. Because remember, in the sentencing phase, they're looking for any aggravating or mitigating circumstances. And so when you look at the fact there are 4 different women that he's killed, 2 that are this re-sentence, and the fact, Stacey, that you hear from the victim, and it's a grandmother who doesn't hear from her 13-year-old, does everything to find her 13-year-old, cannot, and then has to be asked for dental records to even identify her own grandchild, and juxtapose that with this defendant saying matter-of-factly, oh yeah, poking her with a stick, she was hot, I burned her, as if it's no big deal.
Right. He says, yeah, I carried her, it wasn't that hot. Well, we'll be hearing more of that police interrogation with Anthony Kirkland from years back. But first, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more of this Law and Crime Rewind. Stay with us. Welcome back to Law and Crime Trial Network. This is the Morning Docket. I'm Stacey Delicat in for Jesse Weber today, and we have been rewinding to the Anthony Kirkland resentencing trial we saw over the summer. Now, just a quick recap again. Anthony Kirkland convicted of killing 4 women. In fact, earlier in his life, he was convicted of killing a 5th woman, and he served time for that. Well, after he was released from jail because of that murder, he went on to kill 4 other women. 2 of them, Mary Jo Newton and Kimmy Rawlinson. For those 2 murders, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. Another trial comes up, and this is the one that has to do with Cassandra Crawford, just 14, and Esme Kenny, 13. 2 girls that Kirkland encountered, brutally murdered, burned their bodies. And during that trial, he was sentenced to death. However, that death sentence was thrown out because of prosecutors' remarks, and that's what we're seeing now. We're seeing the retrial to determine whether or not he'll get the death penalty again. In just a moment, I want to talk about the prosecutors' comments and why they triggered this sentencing retrial. But first, let's get back to what we saw in this resentencing phase. And we heard from several of the victims' family members. Earlier this morning, we heard testimony from Cassandra Crawford's grandmother. Now we're going to hear from one of Mary Jo Newton's family members. She was 45 at the time she was killed by Anthony Kirkland.
You had mentioned these mental problems that developed. Did she actually have to be hospitalized for those in March of 2006?
She did. She was on the psychiatric unit at the UC hospital for a while.
That was in March of 2006?
I think that was about when it was. She was living with my mom, and my mom was trying to help her, but no one...
Did she want help?
Not the right kind of help, I don't think. She wanted to do what she wanted to do, and she didn't want to listen to us. Tried to say, Mary, this is important or whatever, you know. She wasn't listening too well to us.
After she was in UC Psych in March, she got out, and if we could go then to June of 2006, when was the last time you actually had contact with your sister?
The weekend. It might have been like June 11th and 12th, I'm thinking. Was the weekend that I was down here.
At your mom's house?
At my mom's house.
And she was still there?
Yes, she was there. And I saw her on that Saturday night, and she was going to be going out to meet somebody. I don't know who. She was on the phone with someone and was trying to arrange for somebody to come and pick her up. I don't know who she was talking to, but she wound up leaving the house, and to my knowledge, she left on foot. I mean, I think I was at the door and watched her walk down away from the house, and that's all I know. I mean, I don't know if she got picked up or not. I mean, I can't say that for certain.
Did you ever see her again?
No, I did not.
Did you try to get a hold of her after that?
I talked to her the next day on Sunday on the phone. I believe she called my mom's house. Of course, I was still there. I was down for the weekend. And I tried to tell her to come back.
Come back to your mom's house?
Come back to my mom's house. I said, come back. We're trying to help you and get you some help that you need. But she...
Did she come back?
No, she did not.
Is that the last time you ever talked to her or heard from her?
Yes.
Well, that was actually a witness reading the previous testimony of Mary Jo Newton's sister. Remember, Mary Jo Newton was killed back in 2003, and the original trial in which Kirkland was convicted of her killing happened back in 2010. So, you know, Mary Jo Newton's sister not around anymore. We heard some of the testimony, though, that she gave the first time around. Now let's hear some testimony. Now actually let's hear Anthony Kirkland himself talking about Mary Jo's murder. More now from that police interrogation tape.
At Vector Marketing.
Did you work anywhere during this time period?
Kaiser's, Vector's.
Well, this is 2006, so you were you still at Kaiser's?
I don't think so. I know that the more me and her smoked, the more that I drank, the worse things got.
What happened? Where did it come to the point we had to leave before murder came, did you?
Mm-hmm. So most of the time was traveling.
So where did you go after you left your house?
I drove around, tore down about 81.
Then what happened?
So about 81, the argument, and then they just started going, getting worse and worse and worse. And
what happened?
I told her to leave her alone. That it was my son's mother's place. And she was just a friend. And then she wasn't really.
She was kind of jealous about Roberta.
No, she was actually more worried, but also more hungry, and she was more.
So she became a problem.
And
your friendship was being challenged.
And then she hit me.
Now where was she hitting you? Where was this out after that?
Up by Edenport.
In the van? Then what happened? Did she die in the van? Yes.
Yes.
How did she die? What happened to cause her death? You choked her? I mean, how? Was it like this when you're facing her? Were you in front of her? Were you behind her? I mean, were you guys face to face? And tell me how. What happened?
She, I choked her from the back.
Like put your arm around her like this? Or, I mean, or like this? Was she fighting?
She,
Was she just...
She didn't fight.
That just don't sound like her.
Mary.
Well, I mean, you know her.
She did. At times she did. I know she, she told me that actually she said, she turned around and she looked at me. And she told me that
again there we heard previously recorded audio testimony, actually way previously recorded from back in 2010 of Anthony Kirkland being asked about the murder of Mary Jo Newton. We know she was his second of 4 victims that he killed after being released from prison in 2003 for another murder. I want to quickly talk about this sentencing retrial, though, why it even happened, and that's because let's just recap this once more. Kirkland was sentenced to life for killing Mary Jo Newton as well as Kimmy Rawlinson in a second trial for the murders of the 2 teenage girls, Esme Kennedy and Cassandra Crawford. A jury sentenced him to death, but a court overturned that sentence because the prosecutor made statements saying that, look, he's already serving life for these 2 women. These 2 young girls shouldn't be freebies. So Judge Ashley Willcott, explain, what the problem is with that remark to our viewers who may not realize that that is, going too far, as one judge decided.
Right. So, the Supreme Court decided it crossed the line, and it crossed the line because it becomes prejudicial, right? So, closing argument, attorneys have a lot of leeway, Stacey, as you well know, to make the argument based on the evidence presented. But there is a line, and if you cross that line, it begins to prejudice the jury and tell them what to do outside the scope of your argument based on the evidence presented. And that's what that state Supreme Court ruled and said, you went too far to say that there were freebies and to say he deserves to die. Too much. Can't say that much.
All right. That's why we are back where we are at a new sentencing phase, because that's what he got after, as you said, the Supreme Court overturned that death sentence. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, much more from this Law and Crime Rewind. Welcome back. Jesse Weber is off today. I'm Stacey Delicat in for him. We are continuing with our Law and Crime Rewind, Anthony Kirkland's resentencing trial. Now, there are 4 different victims here, a lot of different stories to keep straight. Now we're going to talk about Kimmy Rawlinson. She was actually Anthony Kirkland's 3rd murder victim after he was released after serving 16 years for another unrelated murder, that murder back in 1987. Now, there you see Kimmy Rawlinson. She was a drug-addicted woman, as was Mary Jo Newton, whose family we heard testimony from before. Kimmy Rawlinson also murdered by Anthony Kirkland. Let's listen now to her father, Gary Rawlinson's deposition.
2 problems. One, the violence that you've mentioned earlier, and the second, drug addiction.
Did she attempt to get help for that?
Yes, she did.
How was that?
We being myself and my wife, we thought it was successful. However, we've come to find out that it wasn't.
If you could describe that, sir.
She spent 60 days in rehab.
Where was that?
That was in Cincinnati.
When was that?
That would be in 2005.
Okay, you're correcting yourself, okay?
I'm correcting myself, 2006.
I believe that was towards August, September, October, that time frame?
Yes.
What about her husband, Anthony, at that point in time? Was he also in the picture still, or I believe something may have happened to him just prior to that?
Yes, before while Kimmy was here in San Diego, Anthony, her husband, was arrested for robbery and sent to prison here in California.
I believe that was, so they've been back and forth between Cincinnati and California, and I believe they actually were back in San Diego in the early part of the summer of 2006.
Yeah, she came at the end of May.
And while they were back here, her husband at the time, Anthony, got involved in a robbery and actually was arrested, convicted, and sent to prison for that.
Correct.
So he was out of the picture as of, I believe it would have been June of 2006.
Correct.
And it was after that that Kimmy returned to Cincinnati to enter some type of drug rehabilitation program.
Correct.
I believe Anthony stayed in prison until actually this year, sometime 2009.
That's also correct.
But during that time frame, she had gone back to Cincinnati, entered this program. Did you, at this time frame, when she's back in Cincinnati in this program, lose contact with her?
Yes, I did.
If you could describe towards the end of 2006 the contact you or other people in your family had with Kimmy.
Yes. Well, we knew she was out of rehab, and that was in late 2000. Well, actually, it was in October of 2006. Our last contact with her is that she was going to go to a halfway house after her treatment, and that was pretty much it.
When was the last time anybody in your family had contact with your daughter?
That would be again in late October.
Did you make attempts after that to get a hold of her and to try to find her?
Yes.
Can you describe that, please?
Yeah, we called the drug rehabilitation place. We contacted. She was on probation. We contacted her probation officer
in Cincinnati.
In Cincinnati, and we also contacted the police department.
Did you attempt to file a missing report?
Yes, I did.
Did you have problems doing that, Mr.
Yes, I did.
How was that?
We were told that she was an adult and therefore...
Well, that was previously recorded testimony, a deposition from the father of Anthony Kirkland's third victim in this 4-murder crime spree, and that is Kimmy Rawlinson. Now, we just heard her father in previously recorded deposition say that Kimmy had struggled with drugs. She was just getting clean. She had moved to Cincinnati. The family lived back in California. In fact, she had 2 children back in California. She was trying to get her life together. She was in a halfway house, keeping constant contact with the family until one day they stopped hearing from her. Now, this is back in 2006. Her bones were not found until 2009. So first of all, that's got to be agonizing for anyone. Judge Ashley Willcott, as we were saying while that played. But what about, the fact that this is previously recorded deposition from back in, we believe, 2009. We don't know. Perhaps the father's not around anymore. They couldn't get him back for this. I mean, do you think when a jury's watching sort of an old video versus actually seeing the witness in person, that plays a role or makes any difference? Or do you think, the testimony's the testimony?
Well, no, I don't think it's as emotional for the jury, Stacey. So if they cannot see the victim, hear the victim firsthand, you're going to lose something, excuse me, as the prosecution or defense in presenting that testimony. However, what is said is something that really is impactful to the jury, because that fact of the matter is this woman was missing. Father had no idea where she was, and like you said, it was years later before her body was even discovered.
Right. I mean, and not, all of these murders senseless. Kirkland got mad because she was in his business, decided to stab her in the throat, and then ditched her body. I mean, truly agonizing for that family and all of the victims who did not find the remains of their loved ones for years. Much more to come in this resentencing trial. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Jesse has the day off. I'm Stacey Delicat sitting in for him, and we are rewinding back to the Anthony Kirkland resentencing trial from this past summer. Well, so far we have heard either live testimony, recorded deposition, or written testimony from family members of 3 of Kirkland's 4 victims. Now we will hear from the 4th. Remember, Esme Kenny, a teenage girl, was out on a run when Kirkland encountered her and raped and strangled her. Obviously, any parent's worst nightmare. This was the 4th of the murders he would commit after being released from prison in 2003 because of another murder. Esme Kenny killed in late 2009, I believe. Let's hear now what her mother had to say.
So I started scrubbing the floor again and just got lost in that. And then I all of a sudden sat up and went, oh my God, Esme is not back. I didn't know how much time had passed, but it was like she should have, I think it's maybe a half a mile all the way around. I just knew something was wrong. I was actually still just in my yoga clothes and no shoes on. I just went right across the street.
No socks?
No. I mean, I was barefoot. I just had that feeling. Like, oh my God.
Your driveway, is it paved?
Oh yeah, it was paved, but kind of gravelly.
And the road itself?
Was paved.
in the path around the reservoir?
It was just grass. Yeah, there was no real. There was some a concrete drive up to it for, I don't even know what that building's used for, but anyway. But that only went up maybe 100 feet, and then the rest of that south side, it became grass everywhere else around.
Well, I'm going to give you this exhibit back. Show us north and south and things of that nature.
So our house would be southeast of the reservoir. That would be the southeast corner. Southwest corner, northwest corner, and then northeast corner.
Okay, and where did you go when you first went?
Oh, I just went right out of the house. And
on the south side?
On the south side, yeah. And then I ran to this corner.
Did you find something there?
Yeah, I mean, right at that corner, there's a tree, and I saw.
This is the northeast corner?
No, northwest corner.
I'm sorry. Okay, I got it.
I went there. So the northwest corner, I found a big pair of jeans under the tree with a mini blind cord in the waist. You want me to go back to where I was?
Yeah.
So I ran straight out of the house, and then I ran up to this corner.
Then I stopped.
You stopped before you ejaculated?
She was on the edge of what was going on. I had her do it.
Had her do what?
Yeah,
she masturbated you? Mm-hmm. So she jacked you off with her hands? Mm-hmm. Remember which hand she used? Her right hand? Did you ejaculate? Then what happened after that?
She told me she wouldn't tell nobody.
Right.
Told me she wouldn't tell nobody. That she'd come back here with me.
So what'd you do? So when you choked her?
I didn't believe her.
You didn't believe her? So is that when you choked her? And how did you choke her again? From the back? Would you like this with your arm in the crotch, or like in your crotch, your arm, the elbow of your arm? Well, I mean, how was it?
It was actually.
Where was her head in relationship to your arm when you choked her?
What was her hand?
Yeah.
Her head.
Yeah.
Her hands was in my hands.
So you choked her with your hands, one or two hands, around the neck from the front or from the back?
From the back.
How'd you do that, Dad? I mean, I was doing to me, but she say anything, or before she died, or did she fight you?
That was something else too. She didn't.
Really graphic testimony there from Anthony Kirkland himself. Remember, he confessed to all of these murders, and in that clip of the interview we just heard, he is describing to detectives how he raped young Esme Kennedy, his final victim. Remember, these were 4 murders that kind of played out over the course of 6 years. He was released from prison in 2003. He wasn't arrested until 2009, shortly after killing Esme Kennedy. It's an interesting story, almost, made for TV movie, right, Judge Ashley Willcott, because police weren't really on to him until, not even until Esme Kennedy was killed, but until he stabbed another man who survived, and they found him and checked out his background and said,
maybe this is the one, and the victims were burned. And so it is fortuitous that they happen to come across him and figure out that maybe he was the one, because he, frankly, is a serial killer and had an MO through some of the different victims that allowed them to connect him to all those murders.
Yeah. And, you got to imagine, of course, the victim's family saying, why was this guy released the first time around? But as we were saying, it was the 80s, different sentencing minimums or no sentencing minimums. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, will Anthony Kirkland be resentenced to death? We're going to find out in just a moment. Stick around. We'll be right back with this rewind after the break. Top of the hour. Welcome back to the morning docket. Jesse has the day off, and I'm Stacey Delacat. We continue with our Law and Crime Rewind, the Anthony Kirkland resentencing trial. He was already sentenced to death for murdering 2 women. This is on top of 2 other women he killed, for which he was sentenced to life in prison. But the death penalty thrown out by an Ohio Supreme Court, who ruled that the prosecutor in this case went too far when he told jurors that Kirkland deserved the death penalty, and that if he didn't get it, it would be like killing these 2 young girls was just like a freebie for him. He was already serving life. Well, the judge decided that went too far, and that brings us to where we are, this resentencing trial. Now, before the break, we heard from a number of family members of the 4 victims. We also heard from Anthony Kirkland himself as prosecutors played an interrogation tape, an interview he did with detectives after being arrested in 2009, where he confessed to all 4 murders and talks about them in detail with relatively little emotion, no emotion really. Well, what about the defense? How will they argue to keep their client from getting the death penalty again? Let's go now to the defense's opening statement.
From other sources, and we have the Ohio State Public Defender provides an investigator. That had already been done prior to our getting on the case. They interviewed family members, former girlfriends. I think you'll recall that Mr. Wendell told you that Roberta Baldwin was the mother of Anthony Jr. At any rate, there are many interviews, many records, hundreds of pages of records. Now, we will, in our presentation, point out some of those relevant records, but all of the records that were gathered are available to you for your inspection. When Dr. Wu got the results, he did his own analysis. That's where he starts. He does the visual analysis, then starts where everyone else has left off. You'll hear testimony about NeuroQuant and other software companies that provide the software so they can do an in-depth analysis of the results. And Dr. Wu discovered, and I don't know how many of you have had statistics training, but Dr. Wu concluded that there was as much as 5 standard deviations from the norm, which is a very significant conclusion. What it told Dr. Wu is something's wrong. These are abnormal results.
So here we have Anthony Kirkland's attorney laying out what he says are the mitigating factors. We heard him say he has a mental defect. He wasn't able to control his actions. He had a head injury. He had experienced a bicycle accident. He's talking about testimony that jurors will hear from a doctor who analyzed results of his MRIs, and so on and so forth. Ashley, I mean, whenever I hear mitigating factors in a case, the argument is always, well, I know plenty of people who have head injuries, or plenty of people who have rough upbringings, and they don't go out and kill 4 or 5 random women.
Right, absolutely. So that's what the jury has to decide. Is it credible testimony? Does it qualify as a real mitigating factor that means he should get life versus death? And I have to say this, what else is the defense going to argue, Stacey? I mean, honestly, you have the admissions, we know that he did it, but they have to come up with something as mitigating factors, and this is probably as good of an argument as any in terms of making some type of argument.
Well, I guess, jurors are also interested to know, does Kirkland ever say sorry? Does he ever become emotional? Does he ever show remorse? I know that's a big part of it. Actually, in the police interview we've been playing for you, bits and pieces of this morning, at one point Anthony Kirkland did sort of break down. Take a listen.
I can't control me.
Well, I understand that.
I can't keep having this.
And this is where I said.
I can't.
And this is where it stops. This is where it stops. Is there anything else? I'm going to take a break here. I'll get you some more water if you want it or something.
I was really over here to the other side today. I really was. And I knew that initially when Keith came in, I knew they had already known.
Yeah, well, it takes a while for people to admit that they did something wrong.
But it was sensitive. It didn't have to be.
Right.
And another thing that, it really was there in them cases now.
Okay.
One of the cases, I didn't know, I know I hadn't eaten, I hadn't drank, I still hadn't known.
You knew right from wrong.
I should have drunk it.
And you knew that you shouldn't have had sex with that girl, but you did, and you're own up to it. I mean, and you shouldn't have killed her, but you did. But the fourth thing is you owned up to it.
It was also things that certain situations, at certain times, there was situations taken advantage of. When they shouldn't be. It was like.
So for the first time in the course of his interview with police, Kirkland starts to break down. He says, it was like he didn't have control, right? This is the first time we sort of hear him giving various excuses, explanations, unclear whether he's trying to just throw things at the wall or whether he really felt that he couldn't control himself. He was sobbing as he talked about his confession, lamented about how he shouldn't have been drinking, and the cops tell him, the important thing is you owned up to it. The fact that we do finally hear him in his own words, getting emotional, breaking down, saying he had no control of it. I mean, will that be enough to sway jurors? I mean, on top of course, mitigating factors that we know his defense attorneys will bring witnesses in to testify about.
Well, I think you have to consider, did he add to that, I'm sorry, I'm remorseful, this is horrible, I cannot believe I've put the family through this.
Right.
He didn't. And so I think that's what the jury's going to notice, is not that he was upset and emotional, but rather what he didn't say when he was upset and emotional. And I also think that, is he upset because he got caught? Or because he committed these crimes? And from that emotion that he just showed, it's really hard to tell.
Yeah, I mean, the argument about drinking, and I didn't eat before drinking, I mean, come on, it's like, well, that obviously would not lead someone in and of itself to kill another person.
Right.
So I agree with you for sure. There is definitely a difference from apologizing and showing remorse to getting emotional and giving excuses. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with much more from this Law & Crime Rewind. right, welcome back. Law and Crime Rewind continues. Anthony Kirkland's resentencing trial. We're almost at the end here when we find out whether this other jury decides to sentence him to death once again after his previous death sentence was thrown out by a higher court. Well, we heard the defense's opening arguments. He says that his client had mental defects. He had had head injuries, a bicycle accident, a terrible upbringing. We are going to hear some witnesses to testify to all of those things. Let's start with Dr. Joseph Wu, a psychiatrist who described, who took a look at Kirkland's brain scans.
Well, the scanning findings show that there are metabolic decreases in frontal cortex relative to occipital cortex and decreased neocortical to cerebellar ratio.
And what does that mean, Norman?
Well, the front of the brain and the back of the brain on the occipital cortex are generally approximately symmetrical or equal in normal individuals. But in Mr. Kirkland, there is an abnormality in the relationship of the frontal cortex relative to the occipital cortex, with the occipital cortex being much higher and the frontal cortex being much lower compared to each other than is normal. And so this is a significant clinical abnormality that indicates that it's consistent with a frontal lobe injury. For example, that could be secondary to traumatic head trauma. The second abnormality is what I call a decreased neocortical to cerebellar ratio. So the neocortex is the frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital area of the brain, is this part of the brain here. And the cerebellum is a small back part of the brain here. And normally there is a lot more activity in the neocortex, the frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital areas of the brain, compared to the cerebellum. But Mr. Kirkland does not show this normal, significantly higher level of activity in the neocortex compared to the cerebellum. And he shows a decreased ratio of this neocortex to cerebellum. And that's something that is seen in individuals who have had multiple head traumas that have caused diffuse damage to the neocortex. And the cerebellum is a relatively robust structure and is less likely to show significant decrease after brain injury. But when you have individuals who had multiple head trauma, so that most of the brain is much lower than it should be, you see this kind of pattern.
And so these tests show there was trauma to the front part of the brain.
They show abnormalities consistent with multiple head traumas to the brain, yes.
Psychiatrist Dr. Joseph Wu, testifying there that he looked at Anthony Kirkland's brain scans and they definitely seem to be abnormal. Judge Ashley Willcott, I'm just wondering, I mean, when we have expert testimony, particularly medical expert testimony, and we're going to hear from another witness who testified the opposite. I mean, how much weight do jurors typically give this kind of testimony? You know, looking at brain scans, the brain scan is abnormal. Someone else is going to say it did look normal.
I think a lot, and here's why, Stacey. So even in the sentencing, they are looking at the mitigating and aggravating factors, as we've discussed. Mitigating factor, and this one, this physician, this expert says, listen, he had traumatic head injury. That can affect behaviors. What is the other expert going to say? They're then going to have to weigh, as we well know, the credibility of those experts and say, which one do we believe? But I think it's significant evidence, and jurors are sophisticated and do listen to what is being said.
Right. I mean, arguably, this is the the best witness the defense has at this point to uphold their theories that, look, he wasn't right in the head, he couldn't control his actions. So, you know, certainly they are hoping that jurors believe Dr. Wu, find him to be credible. Well, let's listen to another doctor who described Kirkland's brain as normal. This is Dr. Alan Waxman, a director of nuclear medicine.
PET scan database of Dr. Wu. Finally, we got you his report, which contained his findings. Is that all correct? You had all of those things? I have all of those. And did you review those all?
I reviewed every single scan that I looked at, and from the normals as well as the study from Ohio State. It was a very simple, straightforward looking scan.
All right. Now let's go through and just briefly what your findings were when you reviewed all those items and documents that we got you. First off, what did the doctors at Ohio State University find when they did the scans on Anthony Kirkland?
Well, the first thing I did was I didn't look at their report. I actually looked at the scan and tried to get an impression. I don't want to be biased. I looked at the scan, and it was a textbook normal study. And I would have been surprised had the study been interpreted as abnormal by the Ohio State doctors, which they did not. They called it normal all the way through, and I agreed with that interpretation.
So when you say normal, you're saying they found no evidence of traumatic brain injury in Anthony Kirkland?
That's correct.
And when you examined that, you agreed with them?
I didn't find any evidence of anything wrong with the brain.
Okay. And then you looked at Dr. Wu's report, obviously. What did Dr. Wu find when he examined Anthony Kirkland?
Usually his reports are very, very similar, and I actually predicted. Sorry.
Dr. Alan Waxman saying, I took a look at the scans. They seem pretty normal to me. So how did jurors reconcile those two completely opposite pieces of testimony? One says, oh, there's clearly problems in the frontal cortex, clearly abnormal brain damage. The other says, looks fine to me.
This is the hardest part for a jury. What do you do with that? And you have 6 or 12 people, depending on the circumstances, here 12 that are back in a jury room saying, who are we supposed to believe? Because we do have two opposite opinions. It all comes down to the credibility of the witness, and that includes things like their demeanor, their personality, their confidence when they testify. Small nuances can make a huge difference, but that's what is incumbent on the jury. It's not an easy task.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. Wu certainly gave a little bit more detail, at least from what we played, in terms of parts of the brains, regions of the brains, the cerebellum, and so on and so forth. But, you know, we will see in just a few moments what the jurors decided. Ashley, I know you're going to leave us in a few minutes, but you'll be back at noon to pick up hosting duties for us, luckily. But, you know, just quickly before you go, he's already been found guilty of death, or sentenced to death. He's already been convicted of the crimes and now sentenced to death once. Do these things, you know, do you think it's possible to have a different different outcome given what we've heard so far?
Sure, it's a new sentencing, and a jury could have a different outcome. Absolutely, it's a possibility. We just don't know what a jury's going to do.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, we are going to find out what Kirkland said, and we're also going to hear from Kirkland himself. Of course, we heard him on the police interrogation tape, but he will make a statement. He will read a statement in court where he does say sorry, where he apologizes for the pain that he has caused the victim. And Ashley, that's sort of what you alluded to before, the difference between an apology, showing remorse, I'm so sorry for the pain I've caused your family, versus, you know, I lost control.
Right, absolutely, and that is crucial for a jury to hear, because those are two absolute different positions to take by a defendant. The thing I appreciate, though, I think this defendant is who he is, and he's saying what he's capable of saying or sharing with the jury, and that way they can make an informed decision.
Yeah. All right, Ashley, thanks again. We know you'll be back to steer the ship for us at 12 noon. So stick around, everyone, and stick around for this break. We'll be right back. We're getting to the close when we find out whether Kirkland was, in fact, resentenced to death. Stay with us.